because I'm interested in drama that involves mind, body, and spirit, something that you can sort of feel on all those levels. Spirit, or whatever you call the invisible and untouchable and metaphorical, and body, obviously something physical that you feel in your loins, and then mind, because all drama kind of takes place in our minds.
Hi, this is Ray Felix, and welcome to Bronx Heroes Comic Con Live. And we're here with David Quinn, Lance Mechanic, and Ron Perriello.
It's really an honor to have you here.
Hi, David. Nice to meet you. Basically, I know that you're best known for Faust, your comic book. And basically, like with something like Faust, you could explain how you sort of came up with that character initially.
All right, great. First of all, thanks for having me. This is very fun. I've missed having these kinds of dialogues in this year of isolation.
Yeah,
and this is the next best thing. We're getting around distancing and connecting remotely, and I hope everyone can be doing this at different ways in their life that are meaningful, helping them stay strong. It's always great to talk about Faust. Faust has been with me since 1986. Wow. And also, of course, with my co-creator, Tim Vigil. I'll mention up front, so I don't forget it, I do have a blog which has a lot of writing about Faust on it. And it's not as rich as I want it to be yet, but there is a lot of stuff out there that's sort of behind the scenes and another perspective on things. And so my blog is inwalkedquinn.com. And I just want to make people aware that I do try to, especially in this year, I've really tried to keep vigilant and provide new content, because I'm not seeing your faces in person at Comic-Cons, and I'm missing you. So Faust began, I think, for Tim Vigil and I separately. We both had ideas about a very primal story. We were both young men with a lot of anger at certain things that were going on in the 1980s scene, our culture. I in particular thought things were very hypocritical and destructive. And it hasn't really changed much, sadly.
No, not at all.
I have white hair now instead of dirty blonde, but I'm still faced with a hypocritical world. With a lot of superstitious autocrats trying to control other people's lives and trying to steal
Fortunately,
everything.
we've gotten so much better since then.
Exactly, right?
I feel like we're going down the rabbit hole further and further. I'm like, are we ever going to get back up there where, where is my America that I grew up with as a kid, right?
I don't know, I'm old, but I think the pendulum sometimes swings. Maybe it swung a little too far towards fairness and equality and inclusiveness for everyone. And so they just had to have one more bit at being really selfish for a few years, but it'll swing back, because if it goes to any extreme, it swings back.
Yeah, the thing I remember about the 80s is, everybody talks about it like it was this great time because of Reaganism, and so forth. But to me, it was sort of like depressing, because you had all these people who were from the hippie generation who were suddenly like yuppies. And it wasn't just that they grew up, or had to make concessions to earning a living. I mean, it was such a cultural shift from that admittedly naive vision of the 60s versus, what it became. And these were like, a lot of these were the same people.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the influence of people like Thatcher and Reagan on society, and just what was going on, and the beginning of sort of like, let's be forever at war with other countries, and let's be forever at war internally. And so I think we both had a lot of anger about that. And I also think we had some anger in truth at the comic scene that we loved, because you know, this is still sadly true to this day. I mean, if you wanted to put something really violent in a comic book, people wouldn't really give you a hard time. But if you wanted to dare to show anything sexual, whether it was sexual violence or whether it was sexual human interactions, loving, you know, you were evil. And
I
so
just heard
Faust kind of ripped.
While you said that.
Faust just kind of ripped into that with the energy that young people have, and we had at the time. That was like, oh, you think Wolverine's crazy? You haven't seen crazy. We'll show you crazy. So that's what we did.
Right.
And people responded to it, but I've mentioned before, I have had a hard time in sometimes in parts of my life with it. Walking through airports on the way to a comic convention or a signing, people might see it and like say, "Do you live like that?" Hell no. Why would I live in a nightmare?
People confuse fiction and reality. I used to do a lot of adult paintings. Like I used to do adult comics, possibly inspired by you too, like subconsciously, because I used to read your stuff, because it's the only one of the few comic books except for Black Kiss that came in a bag. You know, it's like, and I used to do adult comic books, write them and draw them, and people would come up to me and they're like, you know, especially women, they're like, "Oh, do you really do this?" And then of course you're like, "Yes, of course." It's like you just have to shock them because they're just like, you know.
Well, I would just say it's purely autobiographical.
Right, right. Because it was so ridiculous what I was writing, but people just believe that, you know, you know, you just shock them more. So yes, it is. It's like, you know, but go ahead.
Well, a lot of you mentioned, you know, in particular having women see it. I mean, that's something I want to be. I mean, women are an important part of my life, and I have a wife and daughter, and I want to keep my women friends. But I also think a lot of them understand that the characters that I'm trying to write about, the women have as much agency and power and potency in their story.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
As the men, and when you're on those terms, you can go nightmarish places, and you can write about things that are violent or manipulative.
Sure, as long as you're
empowering, you can show people making informed choices and being the agents of their own lives. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I think of that a lot as people put more and more scrutiny on where our stories come from and you know, and where they're going.
Now, I had heard years ago, I don't know if this is true, when I was a kid, there was a Batman annual where there was this guy who grew up just like Batman, but he ends up being a killer. He wore an orange costume. He resembled Faust to some degree. Like his, did that end up being, I don't know if you had written it or if it was Tim Vigil that drew it, but some people have noted comparisons to the two characters.
That's cool. That sounds like it might have been a Steve Englehart story, but I don't remember it exactly. But that sounds.
It was like 82 or something like that.
Yeah, that sounds like the kind of thoughtful thing that he would get into, or maybe Steve Gerber, but I don't think he ever wrote.
Yeah.
Someone was really thinking there. Someone was like thinking like similar to some of the Alan Moore stories, like Killing Joke, that say like, well, what's the difference really at the end of the day between Joker and Batman?
Yeah, and the guy died at the end. They never used him ever again.
Oh.
But it was an interesting story, and I remember looking at his mask was orange. Faust was a much more badass character. But I remember as a kid in '82 seeing that, and then someone wrote an article about it in the internet in the early days of the internet. And I was wondering if that had anything, if that was one of your creatives that worked on that book.
No, we didn't. We were. Tim was breaking into independent comics during the black and white explosion, which later became the black and white implosion, like everything else.
It's coming back, though. It's coming back.
He was a hot artist at the beginning of a great time for indie comics and creator comics and comics for mature readers.
Yeah, I mean, the Dan Zig comics were big then too. Yeah.
Yeah, and at the time I was in college. and teaching part-time and trying to do music and theater and reading comics, reading those, Alan Moore and Steve Englehart and the people I talked about there, Howard Chaykin. I think someone introduced Tim and I helped him out with a science fiction story that he did called Omega. And then we kind of dared to put our cards on the table and show each other some ideas we had for something else. And it just really took off creatively. And then it took off from an indie comics business sense. And at the time there were enough distributors left in the business and enough stores that you could actually do an indie comic and make a living at it.
Yeah, very true. That was a unique time. I was working in the comic stores around that time, and it was shocking to see how different it is now. Now you don't see anyone in a comic book store. It's almost like walking into a library. Tell us briefly about the movie. Like, how did you guys go from comic to film? How was that transition? Did you have any creative processes doing that transition? Did you have anything to do with the film being written or made or consulted?
Yeah. We were both consulting on the film, and I wrote the script, and I was involved with first Stuart Gordon, the original producer director, and then later Brian Yuzna, who directed the '99 version that you'll see on DVD. And so at a certain point, they were going to film it in Barcelona, and I was not on set, and neither was Tim, so we're not involved anymore. But it was, I mean, Yuzna and Gordon were Faust comic fans, as were Ted Chalmers and Michael Burnett, the other original producers. So I mean, I think they knew they wanted to have someone involved, and they wanted to pay close attention to the comic. There's a lot of great stuff from the comic in the film. Now, I think the film kind of looks like they ran out of time and money, and it could be better, but I was proud that we made it. Eventually,
I would put it up there with the first Spawn movie, or the only Spawn movie. I mean, I would say, if you look at that movie today, it looks like the same thing. Like, they were great concept, really good film at the time. But they run out of money. It's like
but still, I'm proud of it, and there's some things about it that are very fun. And some of them were directly from things that Tim and David had put together for the comic, and some of them were not translations, but extrapolations. I mean, I didn't finish the scripts for Faust because after a while, when I had to find other work to also continue to be a writer, I had lots of work. And I was busy on a lot of different things. So I wasn't doing only Faust like I was in
I remember Razor. You're doing Razor, I know, for Image and so forth.
So it's fun with other media. And I continue to talk to people all the time. There's always interest in doing games, movies, TVs, all that stuff. So we're always talking to people. And it's a long, long process, and it involves many people. But, we'll probably do more someday.
Hey, why not? It's never too late. I think now is a good time because you see what's happening with DC Comics and Diamond Distributors, and I see a prediction of Disney doing the same thing because they have their own distribution, and then Diamond's going to have to get their act together and start opening up more towards the independents, which they already have a lot of independent titles that they represent, but they're not always forthcoming or honest about their dealings and how they treat independence. I think that's going to change. So
yeah, but I think the character would be very timely now, in a movie or a TV setting, especially since everything seems to be going more and more towards streaming, and they have a need for content.
In terms of other things that I've worked on, I mean, I've got a lot of interest in someday seeing other media take on the Monster Hunter. That's a very goth story that I worked on with Hannibal King called Night Vision. Or the other thing I did with Tim that's fairly well known, Avatar published the comics, 777 The Wrath. I mean, that was kind of like my take on a sort of a taxi driver movie.
Right.
Only told as a comic book with supernatural characters in it. So it's a demon taxi driver.
Well,
that's sort of what I saw on the screen when I was looking at Joker. It's like, this is kind of revisiting Taxi Driver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, because they were saying that those kind of character study type movies, the only way, like the way Taxi Driver was or King of Comedy, you couldn't do those now and release them as a movie. The only way they saw a way to do that was to take a character like the Joker and basically make that movie through that character. So it was sort of like a Trojan horse, like a comic, something that was made to be like a mass, comic book movie, but was actually a character study about mental illness.
I actually love that nomenclature, Lance. I think I haven't heard it before.
Yeah.
I think it's just perfect. It's a Trojan horse movie. We'll get you in the door, and then we'll show you what we want to show you.